The plane had barely touched down in Miami when I stepped out of customs, my suitcase rolling behind me, expecting a familiar welcome. Instead, a stranger handed me a folded paper, their smile polite but empty. "You're going to want to see this," they said. I unfolded it slowly. My heart skipped a beat. My name, my address, my home, sold. Sold. While I was thousands of miles away in Australia, my $750,000 house had been signed over and the keys were already gone. The world seemed to tilt slightly, though I kept my posture calm, my voice neutral when I asked, "Who authorized this?" They shrugged. "I'm just the messenger." Behind them, someone laughed, a voice I recognized, sharp and cruel. My brother. And just like that, a lifetime of memories had been reduced to a single mocking sentence. But when I looked at the deed, a tiny detail caught my eye, a date that didn't match anything I had signed. I'm Erica, and I've always believed that calm is stronger than anger. Most people would have panicked, screamed, or stormed into their family home, but I've learned early on that chaos benefits only the reckless. The plane ride from Australia to Miami gave me time to breathe, to observe, to plan. I kept my eyes on the stranger, on the deed, and most importantly, on my brother Smeg. But as I glanced at the pile of boxes in the driveway, my things, my life, displaced, I realized that this was only the beginning of a carefully hidden betrayal. 4 years, my life had been a careful balance of work, family, and personal responsibility. In my career, I was meticulous, reliable, the one everyone turned to when things needed fixing. At home, I had played the role expected of me, the obedient daughter, the considerate sister, the invisible mediator. I gave my time, my energy, my trust, and in return, I expected nothing spectacular, just honesty and respect. Miami had always been my sanctuary, a place where memories of laughter, holidays, and milestones filled every corner. I had invested more than money in that house. I had invested pieces of myself, small sacrifices stacked over decades. Yet, standing on the driveway and seeing my world upended, I realized how thin the veneer of familial loyalty had always been. The truth of my role, quiet, dependable, and overlooked, was now brutally exposed. Everything I had given, everything I had built, could be dismissed with a signature and a laugh. My mind, trained to notice patterns, flickered with questions. How long had this been planned? Who else knew? And most importantly, what had been done with the parts of my life that couldn't be replaced? As I stepped closer to the boxes, I caught a glimpse of something odd, a receipt sticking out of a folder that hadn't belonged to anyone I trusted. Over the years, small signs had always whispered that I wasn't truly seen. Little dismissals, subtle undermining, jokes at my expense disguised as banter. I had noticed them but never acted, trusting in the bonds of family. And yet now, as I surveyed the chaos in my home, the patterns crystallized. The mover's hurried efficiency, the oddly empty shelves, the precise order in which my belongings had been disturbed, it wasn't random. Someone had planned this. Someone had exploited my absence. I noticed how casually my brother walked past, hands in pockets, eyes flicking with faint amusement at my growing shock. My parents said nothing. Their silence was deafening. They didn't intervene, didn't question, didn't protect. It was as if my presence, and my pain, was an inconvenience to be tolerated. Even the neighbors' polite glances felt loaded, their curiosity masking a subtle judgment, as though they were witnessing my incompetence in real time. And then, hidden among the discarded mail, I found a document I hadn't seen before, a check, signed with my brother's familiar scrawl, dated weeks before I had even left for Australia. It was small, almost insignificant to anyone else, but I knew immediately that it was the first piece of a larger puzzle. And I had a sinking certainty what I was holding in my hands was only the beginning. The days after my return blurred into a calculated observation. My brother, once cautious, began to grow bolder. Each question I asked about the sale, each request for explanation, was met with a shrug, a smirk, or a dismissive laugh. "It's done," he said, as if the simplicity of the statement could erase the layers of deceit. Publicly, he played the role of a responsible family member, cordial to neighbors, polite to the movers, cheerful at dinner. Privately, though, His arrogance dripped through in tiny, telling ways, the lingering glance at the empty rooms, the slight tightening of his jaw whenever I paused near the papers I was quietly inspecting. My parents stayed quiet, pretending ignorance, as if they had no memory of the house that had sheltered years of family life. Even friends who had known my meticulous nature assumed I had overreacted or misread the situation. Their dismissal was subtle but suffocating, a social isolation crafted without overt cruelty. I felt the old patterns resurfacing, the world ignoring my careful observation, my dignity reduced to something fragile and questioned. Yet within this quiet dismissal, a crucial opportunity emerged. Every lie, every avoidance, every forced smile by my brother left traces. The confidence he projected in public belied the mistakes he had made in secrecy. And as I watched him recount his version of events to friends, I noticed a slight inconsistency, a slip of a date that didn't match the legal records I had begun to pull together in my mind. It was small, almost invisible to anyone else, but for me, it was a thread. And when I tugged at it, I sensed that the unraveling had already begun. As the days passed, the social dismissal deepened. Friends and extended family, caught in the web of my brother's charm and my parents' silence, treated me cautiously or avoided me entirely. Even casual remarks carried a subtle undertone, questioning my presence, implying I had mismanaged, hinting I had lost control. Gaslighting was quiet but relentless. Every attempt I made to assert facts was met with doubt, a faint sigh, or a forced smile that suggested, without saying it, that perhaps I was imagining things. Inside, a storm of frustration churned, but I refused to give it voice. I had learned long ago that visible panic feeds the manipulator. So I maintained a calm exterior, my words measured, my expressions unreadable. At night, alone in the rooms that had once been my sanctuary, I documented every conversation, every transaction, every movement of my belongings. Notes, timestamps, photos, an invisible fortress of evidence that only I could see. Even as self-doubt whispered, reminding me of the absurdity of challenging my own family, I noticed something powerful. The world was revealing itself. In their arrogance, in their overconfidence, they left patterns behind. Every omission, every lie, every casual dismissal was a breadcrumb. And I realized, while they thought they were isolating me, I was quietly mapping the truth. Then, one evening, as I reviewed the folders I had been collecting, a single email caught my eye, one I hadn't expected. Its sender was familiar, its content subtle, but its implications were chilling. Someone else knew of the sale, and they hadn't acted yet. It was a quiet Tuesday when the full weight of the situation seemed to crash down. A call from the title company confirmed my worst fear. All paperwork appeared legally complete, my signature allegedly verified, and the buyer's rights seemed indisputable. Even the local authorities, after a preliminary review, suggested that without hard evidence to the contrary, the sale stood. My carefully built life in Miami appeared to have vanished overnight. Friends and distant relatives, once neutral, now whispered behind polite smiles. My family's confidence radiated outward. My brother walked with the ease of a man who had already won. I had anticipated confrontation, I had prepared strategies, but the reality of public perception was harsher than I imagined. Everything I had relied upon, my reputation, my professionalism, the quiet trust one had built, seemed irrelevant here. For a moment, the gnawing thought emerged. Perhaps I had miscalculated. Yet even as the world seemed to weigh against me, I noticed cracks in the facade. A phone call left on my voicemail, a hurried signature on an unrelated document, a fleeting expression of guilt in my brother's eyes. Small, almost meaningless to anyone else. But I recognized them. Every detail mattered, and in these fissures, the truth was quietly waiting to be uncovered. And then I realized there was one document missing from the buyer's file, something that should have been standard. A small oversight that, if traced, could unravel the entire illusion of legality. I did not collapse. I did not yell, did not demand immediate restitution, did not beg for sympathy. Instead, I observed. Every conversation, every transaction, every casual remark became data, pieces of a puzzle that others thought I had abandoned in shock. I walked through the empty room slowly, touching the corners that had once held my life, noting what was missing, what had been tampered with, what had been left behind. Each detail reinforced a pattern. My brother's arrogance was matched by carelessness. Isolation no longer felt like punishment. It became my advantage. While others assumed I was broken, I was quietly gathering leverage. I checked the dates, the bank records, the signatures, line by line, detail by detail. Every discrepancy, no matter how minor, was recorded, cross-referenced, and stored. My calm became a shield, my patience, a weapon. And then, late one night, a familiar name appeared in a file I had nearly forgotten, a witness who had seen a critical meeting weeks before I left for Australia. Their testimony, innocent in appearance, could tip the scales if I played my cards right. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet sink in. The house was gone, the laughter had echoed, but the first real threat of control had just presented itself. Yet as I prepared to reach out to this witness, I noticed something strange, a shadow moving outside the window, lingering longer than anyone should. As I pieced together the timeline, repetition revealed itself like a slow drumbeat. Small lies, overlooked signatures, convenient absences, each act of deception traced a predictable path. My brother's overconfidence, my parents' selective silence, even the buyer's casual gestures, they all followed patterns I could anticipate. Where others saw chaos, I saw strategy, and where others felt panic, I felt clarity. The more I examined, the more I realized that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. This had been orchestrated over weeks, maybe months, each move carefully designed to minimize suspicion. Every detail mattered, the order of the movers, the dates on the documents, the way my brother had ensured no one questioned him publicly. My anger was quiet now, replaced by a precise awareness. I could predict the next misstep before it happened. I revisited old emails, cross-checked transaction logs, compared timestamps. Patterns emerged, almost elegant in their symmetry, revealing the points of weakness hidden in their overconfidence. Every oversight, every unnecessary flourish of arrogance was a potential lever. And I realized that I wasn't just observing anymore, I was positioning myself. Then, as I traced one last email chain, a single sentence jumped out, one that didn't make sense in the context of the sale. A name I hadn't encountered before appeared, connected to both my brother and the buyer. Someone else had played a quiet part, invisible but present, and they hadn't realized I was watching. While my family believed I was reeling, I quietly began assembling a hidden advantage they could never anticipate. Every call I had made from Australia, every digital trail, every timestamp transaction, everything was being documented meticulously. I compiled photographs of the empty house, receipts for moved items, bank statements, email correspondences, and even casual social media posts that proved I had been abroad the entire time. Each piece was a silent witness, invisible to them but undeniable in its credibility. I reached out to neighbors under the guise of casual conversation, noting anything they might have seen. One had remembered a brief visit from a man carrying documents weeks before I left, a detail that seemed minor, but aligned perfectly with the forged signatures I had discovered. I traced every professional connection the buyer had used, uncovering subtle inconsistencies in the chain of custody that no one else had noticed. Even more importantly, I kept it all hidden from my family. While they flaunted their supposed victory, I was quietly assembling a fortress of evidence. Every overconfident smirk, every careless lie, every arrogant assumption they had made was being countered with precise documentation. They had no idea that the control had already shifted, not through confrontation, but through preparation. Then, as I reviewed my notes late at night, a small file appeared in my collection. An internal memo from the buyer's legal team mistakenly CC'd it to the wrong address. It revealed that they had doubts about the authenticity of one of my signatures. They hadn't acted, they had hesitated, and they had never realized I could prove the truth. I leaned back, letting the realization settle. The game was no longer about recovery, it was about strategy, timing, and leverage. I held the power, unseen, unchallenged, waiting for the perfect moment to act. And yet, as I closed the laptop, I noticed a faint light flicker across the driveway. Someone was observing me tonight. Something inside me shifted. The panic, the frustration, even the faint pangs of anger that had once clawed at me, they no longer dictated my actions. I realized that I did not need validation from anyone, not my family, not my neighbors, not even the legal system. My confidence was no longer reactive, it was quietly absolute. Every observation, every document, every thread of evidence became an extension of that inner certainty. I stopped seeking approval or acknowledgement. Where I had once felt compelled to justify my existence in my own home, I now moved with a calm that was almost imperceptible, like a tide gathering strength beneath the surface. The chaos around me, the empty rooms, the mocking smirk of my brother, the hushed whispers of friends, did not disturb me. I watched, I waited, and I let the patterns reveal themselves. In this silence, I discovered freedom. The ability to act was rooted not in force, but in patience. I no longer reacted to slights, I anticipated them. Every misstep my family made, every overconfident assumption, only strengthened the leverage I now held. Where they saw a woman broken by circumstance, I had become a strategist, quietly orchestrating her next move. But as I embraced this transformation, I noticed something that unsettled me, a subtle anomaly in my brother's behavior, a glance that lingered too long at an empty corner, a hesitation in his movements. He was starting to sense that I had changed, that I was no longer the same sister he had underestimated. And in that fleeting, almost imperceptible hesitation, I realized he might be making a mistake he could never recover from. With clarity and confidence now firmly in place, I began planning with precision. Every step was calculated, every move measured. I created timelines, cross-checked legal documents, and mapped the entire chain of events that had led to my home being sold. No detail was too small. Signatures, dates, witness recollections, even casual observations by neighbors became part of a meticulously constructed network of proof. I consulted quietly with professionals, lawyers, financial advisors, and real estate experts, without revealing my intentions. Each insight, each piece of advice, was folded into my plan, ensuring that when the time came, my actions would be unassailable. I made contingency strategies for every possible scenario, anticipating attempts at deception or obfuscation. My patience became a weapon, my restraint, a shield. At the same time, I watched my family. My brother's overconfidence continued, and tempered by any sense of caution. My parents remained complacent, smug in their perceived victory. Every misstep they made, an unnecessary email, an overlooked signature, a casual brag to a neighbor, added to my growing arsenal. Even the buyer, oblivious to the full scope, had left gaps in their documentation, subtle oversights that would become critical when the time came. I collected each piece, stacked them carefully, and waited. And yet, amid the careful orchestration, a single unsettling thought emerged. While I had accounted for almost every angle, one person, someone whose presence I had overlooked, had been subtly involved in the sale. Their role was unclear, their motives hidden, and their potential interference unknown. As I reviewed my notes late one night, I realized that if this person moved before I could anticipate them, it could change everything I had meticulously prepared. The day I returned to my home officially felt like stepping onto a stage set for confrontation. My brother had assumed victory. The house, though familiar, seemed charged with the tension of his arrogance. He smiled easily, expecting me to react with shock, with anger, with weakness. But I walked in with calm precision, observing every detail, the placement of furniture, the faint scent of cleaning agents, the subtle rearrangement of my belongings. Every alteration told a story, and every story revealed carelessness. Neighbors greeted me politely, curious, yet unaware that the power dynamic had quietly shifted. I carried no weapon, no shouting voice, no desperate demand. My presence alone, composed and unwavering, unsettled my brother more than any outburst could. My folder of evidence, hidden but complete, was my silent reinforcement. Every glance I exchanged, every step I took, reinforced my quiet dominance. I noticed his confidence waver slightly as he recounted small victories to a visiting friend, each embellishment a mistake that I had already documented. The stage was set. All the control, all the preparation, had led to this precise moment, in the same space where humiliation had once been served. And just as I was about to speak, to make the first move, the front door opened, revealing someone unexpected, someone whose presence could tip the balance entirely. My brother's arrogance escalated with every step I took. Believing I was still the same frightened sister, he pushed boundaries he had never dared before. Documents were waved in my face, false stories repeated, and casual boasts spilled to anyone willing to listen. Each act of overconfidence left a trail, unguarded, for me to trace. He didn't notice the subtle ways I recorded everything, the hidden photographs of signatures, the timestamps of calls, the careful notes of every conversation. While he sought to intimidate, I observed. Every boast, every smirk, every careless assumption became ammunition. My parents, still silent, became complicit in their own undoing, offering no intervention, no caution, nothing but passive consent. And then came the slip, a single, careless sentence while he recounted events to a friend. A date mismatch, a forged approval acknowledged in passing, a statement that contradicted a signed document. He had overreached, confident that my calm meant weakness. I recognized immediately the opening. The arrogance that had fueled his confidence now revealed the cracks in his fortress. One misstep, one overlooked detail, and the entire illusion could collapse under its own weight. But as I prepared to exploit it, I saw another figure, someone quietly observing, perhaps waiting for the right moment, their presence unexpected and potentially disruptive. My careful planning suddenly faced an unknown variable that could change everything. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to demand attention. I simply presented the evidence, the timeline, the signatures, the correspondence, the witness statements, all meticulously organized. The room fell silent as my brother's smirk faltered, his carefully crafted arrogance evaporating under the weight of undeniable proof. Every casual boast, every overconfident claim, every attempt to dismiss my concerns was dismantled quietly, fact by fact. Neighbors, friends, and professionals in the room absorbed the details in real time. No embellishment, no dramatic flourishes, just truth, precise, undeniable, and methodical. The evidence spoke louder than any argument, exposing forgery, deception, and abuse of trust. My parents' silence became their acknowledgement. Their complicity was now visible to all. My brother shifted uncomfortably, trying to reclaim composure, but it was too late. Each flaw in his story, each contradictory detail I had documented, aligned perfectly to reveal the full scope of his actions. I remained calm, composed, almost serene, letting the law, the facts, and the truth do all the work. Even the buyer, previously confident, glanced at the papers, their uncertainty palpable. The authority of documentation, the clarity of preparation, and the weight of observant patience left no room for argument. My control was absolute, not through rage, not through confrontation, but through meticulous strategy. And just as the room began to grasp the full extent of the betrayal, my phone buzzed with a message. A name I hadn't expected, a witness who had been invisible until now, confirmed one final detail that could either seal the victory completely or introduce a last-minute complication. The moment my brother's web unraveled was almost silent. His carefully maintained image, the confidence that had once intimidated everyone around him, crumbled under the weight of truth. Friends who had smiled politely now looked uncomfortable, neighbors whispered in hushed tones, and even my parents' faces betrayed shock that words could no longer mask. Every lie he had spun, every assumption of control, fell apart piece by piece. I said nothing, allowing the evidence and the reactions around him to carry the message. There was no gloating, no dramatic confrontation, just the pure consequence of actions laid bare. The buyer, now uncertain and uneasy, stepped back, acknowledging the legitimacy of my claim. Professional authority figures nodded quietly, documenting the outcome, reinforcing the legitimacy of my methodical approach. In that silence, the social balance shifted. Power, once assumed by my brother, had returned to its rightful place. His collapse was not just legal or financial, it was social, undeniable, and irreversible. Those who had dismissed me now saw the consequences of arrogance, carelessness, and betrayal. And yet, even as the room adjusted to this new reality, a subtle tension lingered. From the corner of my eye, I noticed movement, someone who had been quietly watching throughout the ordeal, someone whose intentions remained unclear. Their presence suggested that while the main battle was won, another, more delicate challenge might still be unfolding just out of sight. The legal proceedings moved swiftly once the truth was undeniable. My home in Miami was returned to me, the sale reversed, and the forgery formally documented. My brother faced formal scrutiny, his reputation quietly but firmly dismantled among family, friends, and neighbors. My parents, caught between disbelief and shame, retreated into silence, their complicity exposed without a word spoken. Life resumed in the house that had once been stolen from me, but with subtle, unmistakable shifts. I arranged my space with calm authority, reclaiming control over every corner. Friends and neighbors approached with renewed respect, no need for explanations. My composed presence conveyed the restored balance. Yet even amid the resolution, a faint unease lingered. The shadow of someone watching, the ripple of a possible unseen observer from the earlier events, reminded me that victory was always fragile. Success, I realized, was as much about continued vigilance as it was about justice delivered. And as I set down the last of the boxes and walked through rooms now fully mine, a small envelope slipped under the door, a single note, unsigned, with a message that suggested the story might not be entirely over. I sat quietly in the living room, the sunlight falling softly across the restored furniture, the air carrying the faint scent of familiarity. The house was mine again, not just the walls or the roof, but the years of memories, the pieces of life that no one could erase. Victory had not come from anger, from shouting, or from retribution. It had come from patience, observation, and the steady application of truth. My brother no longer held power, my family's arrogance had faded, and the law had affirmed what I had always known. Careful, deliberate action triumphs over impulsive force. I did not gloat. I did not need to. There was dignity in quiet resolution, in letting consequences speak for themselves. For a moment, I simply breathed. The house was restored. My life, meticulously reclaimed, was once again under my control. And in that stillness, I felt a rare, complete freedom, a quiet release earned not through drama, but through unwavering composure and strategic patience. The light shifted across the room, settling on the corners where shadows had once lingered. I smiled faintly, knowing that while the battle had ended, the calm I had cultivated would endure far longer than any temporary triumph.